Hello. Oh, wait. There we are. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 18 of The Lore You Know. We're still focusing on the Scarlands, and we're going to break
Forever.
this topic up into a couple of episodes because, kind of like some of the other episodes before this, there's an entire book about the Asaatthi, or the Serpent Folk, Snakefolk. Yeah, yeah, that one.
That one.
Vigil
Exactly.
Watch,
Vigil
Secrets of
Watch.
the Asaatthi.
Asaatthi.
So yeah, the
Yeah.
Asaatthi are snake folk
Snake
essentially. With they're snakes, but they have legs and arms.
and tails.
Serpent folk, and
They're cool. But they have snake heads, basically, and
right,
snake tails with
yeah,
like torso and arms and legs smacked on it.
they're definitely not lizard folk where they have like that kind of
No.
like brawny, lizardy build with like the frills and that big, almost draconic head that
Yeah.
lizard folk have. They are snake
A-
people. Yeah,
And they're not Yuan-Ti, despite looking a lot like
yeah.
Yuan-Ti.
Although we will get
We will
into
get into
some,
that.
yeah. So yeah, today we're gonna just
But
focus on the history throughout because
history.
there's a lot of ground to cover, and they are. We were discussing this before the stream. They are probably the second oldest race,
Or up there.
somewhere.
Arguably tied.
Yeah, on
Yeah.
Scarn.
Yeah. 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 They yeah, so and this history I un- I joked like the only book in Scarlands I hadn't read was Class. I had read a lot of this book before. I'd run the adventure at the end of it, and I ran it so long ago I can't even remember how the adventure tied into my main campaign, but it did somehow. But I hadn't read in detail the early chapters because just honestly didn't need to, and now I'm like feeling remiss about that because of reading this first chapter, I have now put some pieces together for my overall Scarlands timeline because the Asaatthi are such an old race, they also put dates on things. So I now have actual dates for the kind of for the Epoch of Mormo and definitely for everything after that. So the Epoch of Lethean and Gulaben, although those epochs are kind of smooshed together. Um,
Smooshed.
and we pretty much already had dates for the rest for Epoch of Thulkas and Hrunruk and Mazos. And mind you, these are still like within a couple hundred years dates, but it now gives me a pretty good sense of how long these last so many epochs took. Um, so it doesn't tell us how old Scarn itself is, but there's a pretty good sense now,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's not that far back, in on terms like assuming, as I've pointed out, if you just completely ignore all of the dates from Forsworn and Forsaken because they're all bullshit. Um, but this is the other than that broken book, this is the book with the oldest dates in it. And then so I found that really cool. That it's like, oh, this is when this shit happened. Okay, great. And it does connect to some of those worldwide events. Where do we start? That was sort of my summary feeling. But I actually recommend everybody start by getting in the mood by going and running off. And if you're watching this on YouTube later, pause, go Google Duran Duran's Union of the Snake. Listen to that video, watch in horror as they run around in kind of this road warrior vibe thing, and then come back because that's what I did twice, like before this, and I am
Right.
so jazzed
Getting
now.
in the mood. So, actually, before we start talking about their world history, let's just throw out there that their publication history
Oh
started
yeah.
with, and actually, so let me bring this picture up. This is the first Asaatthi to be published. Hello, cutie. I think of the original race art, I love this guy.
Oh.
So in the first creature collection, they made their appearance.
Mm.
So as we've talked about before, Scarred Lands didn't start as a campaign guide, as a world guide, as a setting. I think the publishers were like, we have this setting, but we're not going to sell it that way. We're going to sell it that way, which she's got in her hand there. And
Well, this is the revised version,
right,
which
right,
was the version that came out 3.5, but it's not the original Creature Collection, which I do have elsewhere.
right.
Um,
And before the
but
third edition
yeah,
monster manual came out, Swords and Sorcery, who was the
they did
original
by
publisher,
humans.
came out with their monster manual, and the Asaatthi made
Yeah,
their first appearance as bad guys. But again, there were those rules in there that were like, this is how you can play it as a character. Um,
yeah,
and so yeah, they showed up in third edition. They were technically bad guys, but then with the advent of fifth editions, redeemed, which are the grouping of people but not races necessarily that
yeah.
have decided to no longer follow the Titans.
But
They're
the Asath to me were the first. When the Manticore and the Slytherin and the Ironbird were all introduced as, oh, you can play these now, I was like,
yeah.
that's weird. But when they're like, I'm the Asathi, and I was like, well, yeah, of course.
I mean, right.
That was my reaction.
It
Like,
was
of
just the
course you can play an
logical step.
Asathi.
Yeah,
That wasn't weird at all.
totally.
Because the Asathi aren't, they're bad guys, but they're not bad guys. They're not portrayed. They weren't portrayed in this way as sort of an evil thing necessarily.
Right.
Any more than the orcs were.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of evil society, but it's because they worship Mormo,
Right.
not because they're indicatively evil. So and both the Asathi and the Slytherin each got their own big freaking book. And the Slytherin book we talked about earlier was more like, oh, here's all the different broods and all the weird things they do, and they're all kind of messed up and do horrible stuff. The Asathi book is more like this ancient culture.
Right. It's like a world history
day.
book.
Yeah, and it's fascinating as a playable race because it's less like the Slytherins, like they're new and creepy and they kidnap people and do crap to them, and the Asathi it's more like they're ancient and they're kind of finding their purpose in the world, and to play to me it was more like the concept of redeemed makes sense out of them.
Yeah.
Because it's like, we lost the war and it sucked and we don't know what to do now, and there's a bunch of us trying to bring Mormo back, but that seems to be a lost cause, so let's just move on with our lives. And introducing them as a playable race, just, I mean, that's why it's like it never felt like they were introduced as a playable race. It felt to me they were always a playable race. They just weren't like one you found a lot of because they sort of lived over here and that was it. But so that never got me. Like, I never had a player play one, but it wasn't for the lack of like there being rules for anything like that. It was like I think the main problem was the whole 3.5 level adjustment bullshit. Was like, you can play an Asathi, but not until the party is level 6.
Right.
Nobody would do that. So I think that was probably the problem, really, right there, was those crazy ass level adjustment rules back in the day. But I think they're fun.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But yeah.
So now in world lore, I mean, I feel like we won't go into who they were necessarily, but the first race that was created were called the Viren.
Or the Varen.
Right. And
yeah, so they were made by Gormoth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I apologize to our audience. I'm a little word short today.
And there's like not a shortage of gods with the letter G, or Titans with the letter G as their first. So you're G. Like Gormoth, Golthang, Golgotha. No.
I apologize in advance if I struggle with words today because I'm not doing that great. But yeah, so our first species on Scarn, which coincidentally is also alphabetically the first thing to show up in Creature Collection.
Although it's funny because I was gonna say it's funny because it shows up first, but it's because they've renamed them the Abandoned.
Because they renamed them the Abandoned. They're actually called the Viren, but they kind of look like gorillas. So yeah. I think of them as scarred. I don't know if that worked or not. You probably can put a better picture, but they were Scarred Lands, Neanderthal, basically, is the way I think of them. And and Golthaga should have, or not Golthaga. See, I knew I'd do that.
Gormoth, yeah.
Gormoth
was one of those creators that was like, hey, I made this. What's next?
Well, yeah, he made, in the early days, he made more shit than anybody,
right.
really.
And like
Um,
Fran pointed out in chat, Mormo wasn't the best of moms. Gormoth was not the best of dads.
Actually, I would argue that Mormo was a way better mom
That's
than
fair.
Gormoth was in anything.
That's fair.
She was actually a really awesome mom until the end of her epoch, and then she kind of went south and crazy. And she's so much of her story goes to my theory that as the Titans finish their epochs, they kind of go evil. And Mormo is like 90% of that. Mormo and Mesos are like the solid why of that
Yeah.
because
Do you think it's evil,
she's
or do you think it's that they're just getting crotchety because all of this shit is on them now? They're like, oh, I'm so done with your crap.
well I put it on blame the evil moon,
Yeah. Yeah.
blame the nameless orb, and as they come into power, the nameless orb has more influence on them and starts to twist them into evil. And by halfway through their epoch, they're starting to go off the deep end, and because when you look at them all, with the exception of like Churn, who was always a dick, um, they seem to get worse as their epochs
Yeah.
come in and wrap up. Um, but again, that's me theorizing headcanon. It's not necessarily canon. Uh, yet.
Yeah. If Sarah has her way,
Yeah.
this will
Well,
be
I'll
canon.
probably, I will honestly always still be required to make that subtle. Um, but if you ask me, that's where I would think. But yeah, so why don't I roll back and actually talk about this? So we had so Gormoth made the Varen,
Mm-hmm.
and all the other Titans were like, I want to play too.
Yeah.
So in theory, shortly thereafter, uh, most if not all of the Titans made a thing. I have my doubts whether Churn made a thing that was interesting beyond I made a bug,
Yeah.
but but most of them made stuff. They're like, oh, we can make stuff. Oh, look, I made a thing. And Mormo's thing was the Asaatthi. Um, and and in terms of intelligent things, so it's not that Varen were the first life on Scarn; they were the first intelligent sentient species on Scarn.
Right.
And
Right.
the Asaatthi were Mormo's first intelligent sentient species and only sentient species for a really long time. Like a really, really, really long time. They were her children.
And it's safe
And
to assume that like snakes and lizards and all that
yeah,
were already
it's
around, and
yeah.
monkeys,
We
and
already
all of these
we
creatures.
already had dinosaurs
Right.
and fish and all this stuff was already running around, and presumably go Gormoth and Deneb and everybody was like, we're gonna make life and
Right.
trees and stuff, and that all happened during like the epoch of Kedem, or the one after that one, Gulthane. But it was during the epoch of end of Gulthane into Gormoth that they were like, oh, no, Gormoth was first, then Gulthane. But it was into leaving Gormoths into Gulthanes that they were like, and we're gonna make them smart and intelligent and sentient, and we can talk to them instead of just going, oh, cute fuzzy thing,
Yeah.
go eat,
Go eat that other
Um,
thing.
yeah. So we're gonna make them intelligent, and they're gonna start having a civilization. And so the thing about the Varen is they didn't have much of a civilization. They were like, as I said, Neanderthals. They were like, we have rocks and trees and we can talk, but fire, ooh, big deal. They didn't have cities. They didn't have civilization. And so really the first intelligent species that had civilization, that had true like concepts of growth and community, and not that the Neanderthals didn't, but buildings and infrastructure technology, and we can do magic, were probably in parallel but in different continents, the Asaatthi and the elves, the Asaatthi and Ghelspad and the elves in Termana, and pretty much growing in isolation. The elves don't show up in Ghelspad for quite a while after the Asaatthi have pretty much this is ours and hissed all over it. Hissed, not pissed. That was okay. I'm laughing at my own bad joke.
It is. I mean, it's a fair joke. It's a completely fair joke.
It's a terrible joke. so so Mormo makes them, and they just run around. And they're like, oh, make cities and do things, and they don't really have any solid written history at this point. Um, and it wasn't until so these plagues happened, i.e., almost certainly the epoch of churn. There we go. See, I'm kind of words. I even have it written down. Churn's epoch. So a bunch of plagues happen. People fled underground to try to like, oh, everything's horrible, and Asaatthi pretty much started underground, and encountered like the dwarves who were there. So the dwarves pretty early, um, and they kind of, apparently they lived, I guess, in caves underground, because the surface was too dangerous because of horrible monsters and plagues and stuff running around, which was presumably during Churn and Gorak's epochs. So there's not much said about that until Mormo showed up, who was their creator, and went, I'm gonna help you. You, my people, my babies, I'm gonna make your life better. And she came to them and blessed their leader, Isutha, Iittua, and gave her immortality, effectively. I mean, not effectively, gave her immortality. And she led them out of these caves onto like the surface and started just making civilization and making cities and conquering and doing all the things. And she built her first city, Ithil Elisatek. The names are going to flow.
Right.
Itilelsaasaatek. Does anyone care? No
I
one
feel
cares.
like when you put too
We'll
many
just call the
vowels
first.
together, it's like, creating some kind of dark hole in the universe, and so you need to not do that. But apparently, they did not believe that when they wrote this book.
So yeah, and Asaatthi themselves, or Asaatthi, Asaatthi,
Asaatthi.
Asaatthi, Asaatth, or and I throw an I on the end if it's plural. So
Yeah.
Asath or Asaath, Asaath, at Asaat,
Yeah, that's
Asaat, Thi,
yeah.
or Thigh,
I think Asaatthi
Asaat
is
Thigh.
easier on my mentality.
Yeah, I mean, we've been calling him Asaatthi for forever, but I was like, how would you actually phonetically pronounce this horrible, horrible word? I mean, this is the only book, to my knowledge, in the Scarred Lands publications that has its own flippin' lexicon at the end. Just to be like, here you go, here's what all this stuff means. Because somebody, and I can actually put my finger on somebody, somebody being Andrew Bates, Werner Hager,
We're
Ben
not
Liam, and Will Timmons,
we're not gonna
and
call
to a
anyone
lesser
out by name, but
and a little bit Joe Carricker, but I cannot blame Joe this time, or why this is like this. But it was Andrew Bates, whoever the hell he is. I'm being horrible. Was who invented these guys, because he was like, let's have cool snake people. And then these other guys just sort of took off and ran with him with this book. So they have a lexicon. So one of these guys was like, I like languages with lots of double letters, particularly double vowels, just to be a pain. And so many of these words have double I's, double T's, double E's. I mean, double E's is normal, but double Is.
and I will point out
Double
that
A's.
this is the only book that there's a lexicon at the end of, that they're like,
Yeah, that's the
these are the language words that we made up that mean this. It's a hefty book.
It is a hefty book, and but yeah. So every vowel gets doubled at one point or another, plus H's and S's. Which, I mean, they're snake people. It's sort of a hissy language, so I'll go with that. So anyway, so first city, she finds this rocky fastness. I don't know what that means, and I'm not 100% sure where in Ghelspad the first city is. It's kind of one of the only ones that I kind of was like confused about the location on. And I spent a chunk of time going, which one's like there's a section that's I'm not saying poorly written, it's written confusingly, and so I had a hard time following, like, did they change the first city or something? But so she makes this city, and it stands for a while, and then she has kids, daughters specifically, 5 daughters, and she's like, "Run, children, go off and make cities of your own." And Mormo grants the 5 daughters also with immortality, and they each run off and make their own city. So there's the 6 cities of the 6 original cities of the South, and several of them we can kind of see where they are today. And totally spoilers. One is in, one still exists, sure, and that's the Jeweled City in the swamps of Kentet. Um, and one was in South Caldor Mountains, just east of Calastia, as it stands today. That's the Tower of Fangs. One, Serpent Mount, is somewhere in the Caldor Mountains. I don't know where specifically, but nearish the Ganges. Kind of get that from context. There's
I don't think it
one,
says in the book, but the art that's in the book that I have up on the screen, I feel like that is the one in the Keldar because it is like built into the side of a mountain.
And the Serpent Mount was not the first, but it was certainly the most central, and I would say the most politically powerful after the first city. Then there's the City of Sages, which I think is probably in where the Accrudent is today, probably. And although arguably there's one, arguably it could have been in the Perverted Plains, and there's one in called the Frosthold in the far north, which I think would be in the Titans Hill Mountains, or maybe in one of a mountain range that maybe doesn't exist anymore here. Because remember, this was, or not remember, but in terms of dates, these cities were built around minus 5,600 old calendar, which from the Scarred Lands timeline is about 9,000 years before current timeline, post AV 150. So approximately 9,000 years before. And when you think about 9,000 years in our own personal timeline, that's like when the pyramids were built,
Right.
really old, long time ago. But it feels like reasonable in terms of age of civilization. In fact, it feels, if anything, weirdly off, because this is before the Epoch of Gould, and this is before the Ice Age that these cities were built. So the Ice Age was actually more recent than we've been assuming. So that's because this puts a date on it. It says these cities were built approximately sometime before, but they were completed by 5,600 OC, minus 5,600 years before the founding of the leading empire, which was 3,000, which was 3,600 and something years ago. So I wrote it down. So yeah, rounding is about 9,000 years ago, roughly. So yeah, so they were made, 6 cities, and her daughters run them, and everyone was cheery, happy. Not really. I mean, the Asaatthi were happy with the Asaatthi, but they went around and basically conquered the continent and enslaved everybody else because we're powerful and we have magic and we rock and we can do that. And they had magic, like crazy stuff on par of high magic you see in D&D now. They could control climate. They could enchant things. They could do travel to other. They could do like elemental planar travel. They had teleportation gates that let them go from city to city. And they had a ton of divination magic, and they created these orbs that they called memory orbs, where they could just kind of dump memory information into them and then use them. So cool stuff all around.
Yeah.
And actually, you see these sort of memory things in some of the core new rulebook stuff for the Asaatthi.
Yeah, it's. I have to say, so actually, for Curiosity Cache, I took this concept, I altered it slightly to make it a little less, like obviously from the Asaatthi, like it's been altered by this elf and she essentially has like a memory cafe where you can go and experience somebody else's
Yeah.
memories, and this
Yeah.
is the basis of that. Like, she took this magic, she found this, and was like, no one else is doing this because it's
And I
old
think,
old magic.
yeah, and I think the conceit is to say that writing, because there weren't like, oh, we wrote it on the side of a tomb or something like that. You find, when you find old Egyptian stuff, it's like, oh, this was written on a stone wall covered in sand, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago. These were like, okay, the ruins were all plundered. This stuff doesn't exist anymore. So how do we know this information? And I think the conceit of the game designers was, there's these memory crystal
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
Okay, and these
that's
survived,
fair.
and this is how they got this information. And because all of this, nearly all of this text, up until more modern day, which was memories of a specific Asaatthi historian, but other than that, Asaatthi historian, all of this comes from, and we found this memory crystal and delved into it and learned all this stuff, and kind of got the memories of these characters, and this chapter, this history of the Asaatthi chapter goes off as it basically bounces from memory crystal to memory crystal as people are talking about this stuff. And the first one, which was dated minus 5600 OC, is because that was when the crystal was made. So, and he's talking, and the guy in that memory crystal saying, I currently live in this city, which has stood here for 200 years. So that's where we get the dates. So it's approximately, I'm going to say probably the Epoch of Mormon started about minus 6000 OC, based on what he says and how long the city's been there at that point in time, roughly, give or take a couple hundred years. That's where I'm putting, how I'm pulling that data in my butt. So they run around all these cities, they enslave. There's humans, there's orcs, there's goblins, and they basically have slaves of all of them, and they're just like, oh, they're ours, and they have to obey us because we have magic and they don't. And I'm picturing like pretty kind of primitive human cultures. And one of the things that struck me as pretty entertaining was a line that says that they had intermixed tribes of humans, orcs, and goblins, and I'm just picturing them interbreeding. Is that where halflings come from? Goblins and humans?
Maybe. I mean, maybe.
She's probably more like that's where like hobgoblins and those guys come from, honestly. Not halflings.
I often,
I
because
think,
this is on topic, I often think about all of the races that have existed on Scarn that are no longer in existence. So like, what came out of these unions that doesn't even exist anymore, or that like,
yeah,
essentially, maybe like a few kids came out and then they were completely different, but then their genes just got diluted over years and years of interbreeding, and so now they don't exist anymore. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you could say these creatures
totally.
existed back in the day. It's
Yeah,
kind of fun.
totally. Yeah, no, it's crazy. You're like, oh, here's a, well, like dinosaurs. We got dinosaurs now, and are there dinosaurs on Scarn? You can have one as an animal
Yeah,
summoning.
I mean, you
So
can. I guess that
are they
depends on you as
around?
a
I don't know.
DM. As a DM on
Yeah,
Scarn, I'm usually like, unless you've seen it, you don't get to be it, and there aren't dinosaurs like running around in Albadia, for example. So
incarnate druid.
that is completely fair. Actually, that would be like the one way that I would allow that to happen as a DM.
Oh,
But I'm not going
I
to tell anyone
did
else.
allow that to happen
Yeah,
as a DM.
yeah, that completely makes sense.
I let Fran druid incarnate character change into a dinosaur because I was like, you're a flippin' incarnate.
Right?
6,000, 10,000 years ago, you were a dinosaur.
And so if you haven't seen the incarnate, what we're talking about is a type of druid that's wild shape, is not based off of like beasts or elementals or whatever, but they can take shapes of
The memory.
previous lives.
Yeah,
So it's like
because the idea is
a
information.
reincarnation, incarnate, but they don't like become a different thing. They take the shape of that for their wild shape,
Yeah.
and
So
so
when they change into a wolf, it's that wolf. It's
Right.
always that
That
wolf that they
specific
have
wolf.
memories of being.
Right.
And so it's kind of cool. So it's not just like, I'm a wolf. No, I was this wolf named George 700 years ago, and I had 7 kids and lived in these woods. And so every time I change into a wolf, unless I was multiple wolves in my past lives, that's the wolf I am.
Right.
So, yeah, and presumably in 6 to 10,000 years, you could have been a lot of things, depending on how old your soul is. So that's neat. So yes, I would say an incarnate change. But back to the snake people. So they had all over Ghelspad, and there were specific talks about specifically in the plains of Lead with the city that was near there. They were like, oh yes, we've got these humans and they're causing trouble, which is one of the entries. Then in around minus 3,850 OC, so about 1,000 years later. So yes, these queens have been around for literally thousands of years. When I said they were immortal, because the mom and her 5 daughters are still ruling the show 2,000 years later, still running Ghelspad. It's like, holy shit. That's how long the epoch. So epoch of Mormo, a couple thousand years. And then everything went to shit. Everything went to shit because of crazy sister infighting. Basically. So they thought they were immortal, and then one of the sisters died, murdered. So immortal can't age.
Right.
True.
Right.
Immortal can't be slain. Not so much.
And it really sucks to learn that the hard way.
Yeah. So they may be immune to disease, they may be immune to aging effects and all that stuff, but you can still, stab them in the heart and cut their head off and whatnot. So, the queen of the Serpent Mount, which was the central city, and also the thing about the Serpent Mount that I thought was pretty neat is it's considered the hub of the empire. It's not the first city. It's not where the Mama Queen lives, but it's the most centrally located one, and it has all this divination magic. So basically, those who rule the Serpent Mount kind of take care of everything that happens in the whole empire, and are in charge of all that stuff of intertrade and transit and communications. Everything's run from the Serpent Mount. So that queen gets killed. Big fucking deal. And the finger pointing goes to Mama. So that sucks. So not Mormo Mama, but the first queen who rules in the first city. Again, not actually sure where the first city is supposed to be. Apologizing, it was not clear. Not in the center. That's all I say. Not in the center, and it's not the ones that I pointed at. So unless it's the one in the Krugen, I don't know. So yeah, so then I was like, oh, it was we think Mom did it, and so the blame's put on the Undying Queen, Mother, and the people of the Serpent Mount are like, you killed our queen, they come after you, and they build this ginormous army, get a couple of the other cities to join with them, and they go march on First City. And of course, the First City is like, we need help! And then a bunch of the other cities go and join the First City. And so basically, you have 2 big giant armies of snake people beating the shit out of each other, and a very pissed off Mormo going, what the fuck are my children doing? So the armies clash. A bunch of cities are like, no, screw you, we don't want to go against them, and they leave them and abandon them, and it's tons of politics, and it's a big mess, and lots of slaves die, and it's just really bad. And then at the very end of the fight, when the folks of the First City feel like they're completely screwed, they're gonna fall, the queen steps up and she's like, no, and she creates this like huge storm, drops it on the army's heads, and just slaughters them. And then Mormo is like, no. And then she strikes the first queen down and kills her. Or at least takes away, actually, I don't know if she kills her, but she takes away her immortality. She strikes the first queen and says, you don't get to be immortal anymore. You just killed your own people, and no. Whether or not she killed her daughter, yeah. So she takes away her immortality. And the queen got really old really fast and does not live much beyond that. I actually wondered though, given the absolute insane power of the storm that she triggers, could that have been what what happened? Like if she put her life force into that storm, maybe. Um, I don't know, but it's a thought. But it's just a theory. But either way, this also triggers the end of Momo's epoch because that storm, and arguably this storm, created by the Undying Queen of the Asaatthi, could have triggered Lethine's epoch because that storm basically ends up covering fucking all of Ghelspad.
That's
and
fair.
Parts of Scarn.
All the Titans were like, so who's next? Well,
who's next? Yeah, and Mormo's power wanes, and Lethene's power comes into play at this point. So now we have like this firm date on the start of the epoch of Lethene, minus 3,850 OC. And I was like, crap, we've got a date on an epoch, dude, and on an earlier epoch, not like of the epoch of Fernrock. No, like one of the early the pre-Ice Age epoch. And yeah, so this storm basically covers everywhere, at least certain Ghelspad. It's not clear how much the rest of the continent it hits, but it certainly changes the weather everywhere. And the elves are like, yeah, the elves seal their borders, and the Asaatthi and the humans and the orcs kind of wander off and hide, and the Asaatthi seal their strongholds. So they seal each of the 6 cities, and they set up these. And this is funky. I adore what they did here. They set up these weird guardians, and clearly they're like super powerful Asaatthi mages. And they have like magics and guardians and things. And I'm picturing like everything, enchantments and spells and snake golems and guard dogs and whatever. And they put these guardians in charge of each citadel, of each of these 6 cities. And then everybody kind of goes underground, under the citadel, and goes nappy bobo. And basically goes into hibernation for a really long time, like several thousand years. They just, we're going to sleep. And with the idea is these guardians were there to A, protect them while they're sleeping, and B, to wake them up when the spring comes back. So that's 3850. Negative 3,000 coming of the ice. So that's the basically transition from Lethene's epoch into Gulaben's. I do not speak of. And this is neat, because this is to me pointing the finger at why this is Gulaben's epoch, which I absolutely love. So they talk about how, okay, all these Asaatthi are like in sleep and hibernation. But every once in a while, and I absolutely love this, they would wake up, eat, consort to the physical pleasures, and then go back to sleep. And I was just like, yeah, that's Gulaben's epoch, all right. That's what you do.
Right.
And I just thought that was fantastic.
Like, all the snakes woke up with morning wood and just are like, what's going on?
They would like do that, and then they would go back into their little mind, and what they're doing in these hibernation, they talk about returning to the sanctuary of the mind, which I think they're using those memory orbs as their sort of hibernation entertainment kind of thing. I'm picturing all these snake people for thousands of years just staring at televisions or something. I don't know what. But it's all reruns. We've seen this one already. So they're doing their thing. And I thought that was great. I was just like, yeah, this is the epoch of Gulaben, all right. And meanwhile, these guardians are out there, but they're supposed to be immortal, but of course Mormo's taken the immortality away. So they start to age, but they've got heavy magic, and they're using magic to prolong their lives rather than Mormo's gifts. And it's basically necromancy. And what they start doing, these guardians, who literally standing watch over these sleeping snake people for thousands of years. I mean, okay, 2,000-3,000, but hundreds and hundreds of years. They kind of go nuts after a while. I mean, there's no kind of. They go insane. And there's this entry written by one of them, and he's basically like, "Oh, I have to stay alive to guard them, but I can't because I'm dying. So I've used my powers to suck the life force out of a few of them that I'm supposed to be protecting. Only a few score.
Yeah, I'm
They
just
were
gonna
old and
borrow
weak
this.
anyway."
I'm just gonna borrow this permanently.
Yeah, exactly. So they start just sucking life force out of these poor sleeping snake folk. Only a few score, which is what's the score? What is the score? 40?
Isn't it
Let's go
20?
back to the getting rest. Is it 20? What did Lincoln say? Anyway, so
20.
20. Okay, so 40, 50 people, they suck their life force out and ended watch believing the sun will never show again. So the implication is during this ice age, there's like, it's not only just ridiculously cold and ice covered, that the sun is not even visible. Like, I don't even know if it's just nighttime all the time or it's just hiding behind the clouds and it's just like a slightly less dark gray sometimes and black others. I don't know. But they can't see the sun through the clouds and the ice, and it sucks. And so the Guardians go insane and bugger off and either die or building madness or leave and just abandon them. So nobody's there to wake them up. And shit happens. And spring shows up because Thulkos wakes up and is like, da 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 da, I'm gonna make spring, and melts the surface. And these humans were like, cool, we're gonna make an empire of fire. And they start doing stuff and building things. And all these Asaatthi are sleeping underground. And they sleep through spring, basically. They sleep through the Empire of the Flame, basically, and miss it. Because their alarm clock doesn't go. 6 alarm clocks fail.
Right?
And craziest part is, of those 6 cities, 3 of them just plain vanish. Like, never woken up, never found. What happened?
Yeah, they might still be there.
Well, they do talk about the ruins of some of them having been found.
Right.
It's clear there, but what specifically happened to them? Yeah. So there could be like, you know, a cool adventure where somebody goes underground and finds like all of these Asaatthi corpses, or maybe it's still hibernating.
Yeah.
I don't know. In one of these abandoned cities. So finally, the Asaatthi something causes the Asaatthi to merge. So 3 of the cities all wake up roughly the same time. And that's and we can list where these were. This was the Jewel City, which I talked about as the one that survives. The Tower of Fangs, roughly in the southern Kaldars, east of Calastia. And then the City of Sages, which I think is the one in the Accrudan, could be in the Perforated Plains. I was not 100% clear on this. If you figured this out better than I did. But it's on a vast savanna somewhere. So these 3 cities wake up. But they wake up separately. And they discover very quickly elves had taken over one of the old cities and were like, ooh, we're going to live here. This is conveniently located, and basically reshape one of the cities and go, we're going to call this Veritray. Oh, Veritray's built in an old Asaatthi city. Okay.
there is a an entry, and I cannot remember what book it is. It's in one of the world books that talks about the history, that essentially is like, there are so many empires that have risen and fallen throughout the ages, and most of them are built on the bones of the other, because essentially, like, in this case, the elves were like, well, here's this city, what do we do with it? Well, we make it our own. And the Empire of Flame was the same thing, where they were like, look at all of this Asaatthi ruin, let's make this our house. And, you know, everything just built on it, on each other, which was really...
Yeah, and then Leading Empire then does it again.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing about the elves is the elves manage to hold it, and they don't lose it. And when all these empires take place, they're like, no, the Ganges is ours, and it is now ours forever. But the elves, I mean, the elves showed up after the Asaatthi Empire started to fade. and they were just like, oh, there's this and I'm having like flashbacks of like, you know, the Europeans coming to the United States going, or coming to the Americas going, oh, there's these buildings here. I guess people used to live here. Oh, they died of the plague. Oops, you know, and finding these old ruins. And that's pretty much what the elves kind of did. It sounds like in the Ganges is like, ooh, we found these old ruins. And it was clear that the Ganges was not always the elves. It was not pristine. And that the snake folks used to live there before, you know, all the shit happened. And they turned on each other and all that business. So one of these 6 cities was clearly in the Ganges. I don't know if it was at the actual location of Eritrea, but it was certainly one of them. The elves took and went, ours now. So one of the 6. Anyway, so these Asaathis, these 3 cities wake up. They look around. First, they're like, oh, we should see who else is around, and they try to contact each other. But because they're so suspicious after that big war, because presumably they remember it, or when people asleep, or I don't know, because of the hibernation or whatever, they're like, no, don't trust them. There was that war, remember? And so they're kind of hedgy about what they say to each other. It's like, yeah, we're awake. How are you? So they're not really saying much beyond, yeah, we're here. So really not getting together, not communicating.
It's like when that friend that you know is moving calls and you're just like waiting to find out what they want because you don't really want to help them go move.
A bit bigger than that. A bit bigger than that. But not quite so. You know, a little bit bigger politically. You know, more like, what's Russia doing now? Maybe we shouldn't. In the meantime, Mormo has moved on. And Mormo is like, well, the Asaatthi failed me, so I'm going to make another race. And she's off mucking about in Termana and finds some humans and goes, you're mine now, and I will turn you into my own new snake people.
Right.
And makes the Yuan-ti.
What happens when I take this and I mush it with this?
So unlike the Asaatthi, which were like snakes that she turned into people, she makes humans and snakes and smooshes them together and makes the Athir, or the Yuan-ti.
Yeah. And you have to wonder, when you go back and you look at those mixed tribes of older ages, were the Yuan-ti actually a very small thing that then, you know, like an actual breeding thing between the Asaatthi and humans, and then Mormo was like, that's a great thing, I'm going to use that as inspiration, but take these humans and change them later on. Did Yuan-ti technically, and I know it's not in the lore, but
yeah, it's not in the lore. I would think that would be, well, it was like, you know, thousands of years ago, but I could see Mormo being inspired by something like that, but I also think it's unlikely, because at least during the heyday of the Asaatthi Empire, they didn't think of humans and orcs and stuff as people. That would have been like
fair.
Doing it with a cow. I mean, they were, or dog. That would have been like their equivalent of bestiality, because they're like, no, they're. So could they have? Yeah.
Right.
Extensively, kind of doubt it.
Yeah, I would not say extensively. Really, I mean, you know, there's those people out there that are like, I mean,
yeah.
If you can think of it, there's a porn of it, so.
Okay, yeah, sure. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I'm saying it was probably rare and super, like, taboo and squicky and.
Yeah, that's. I always think about, like, running things. Not in current day Scarn, but like going back and just be like, I have. Oh, so fun.
Oh yeah, I had to tell you some other time about me running a pre-Divine War game.
Yeah.
Mostly because I was striking out this ginormous, massive module and trying to cram it into Scarred Lands and going, it doesn't work. Oh, it would work if I put it 2,000 years before and put it in Ashrak.
Totally.
That was not a long campaign. The players rebelled very quickly. In any case, so Mormo's off in Termana going, I'm going to make a new thing, and I make these Athir, humans, and they know they know, like, we're human. So basically, she comes to goes, if you follow me, I will give you power. And they were like, power, yeah, cool. So she's like, okay, I make you snake people. And they go, oh, thank you, I have power now. And they get magic and all this stuff. And they're like, hey, cool, what do you want us to do, Mom? And she's like, breed and multiply and be awesome. And they're like, okay, we'll do that. And then, but then they were like dealing with the elves of Tremana, and they're like, the elves of Tremana are like, get out, weird snake people. Humans are bad enough. Now you like humans with poison. So the elves and the Yuan-Ti really didn't get along very well. Plus you've got this before the Charduni dwarves show up. So basically, Tremana is elves and gnolls and Yuan-Ti and some random gnomes and shit and whatever. Not a lot. There's the jungles over there, and so eventually, and you can in the Tremana book there are tribes of Yuan-Ti there and everything, so they're out there. But so eventually the Yuan-Ti are like, so Mormo made this in Ghelspad. Let's go there and see. And so they go. She might have made them in Ghelspad, and they went to Tremana. But anyway, eventually they decide to head back to Ghelspad. And this was in minus 550 OC. So the three cities have just woke up relatively recently. They're just started getting their shit together, but they're still staying in their cities because they're like, the world is scary out there and we don't trust anyone. So they're not, they realize pretty quickly they want to rebuild, they want to do their thing and conquer and stuff, but they can't because there's this giant human fire empire and these crazy powerful elves, and they really don't have the capability to do anything more than, we found some food, So they're pretty much hunkering down in their cities.
Yeah.
And then these Yuan-Ti show up and they're like, we're going to the old country. And they land in East Ghelspad, where you expect people to land coming from Tremana.
Yeah.
Charduni, confusing me. They land here, presumably by boat, and the first thing they run into is the what was it called again? The Tower of Fangs. And the Asaatthi there are like, who the hell are you guys? And the Yuan-Ti are like, you betrayed Mom. We're gonna kick your ass. And there's a nice little cataclysm there. They called it the third cataclysm. It was like that big of a deal. And there was a nice little war, and the Yuan-Ti basically kicked their asses. And one of my favorite bits in this whole thing is this just this human schmo of that region. And at this point, we're starting to see familiar names. They talk about the Kalas province. They talked about, so this is like in and around the Empire of Elves timeline as it's coming out of the Empire of the Flame. And so these places are mentioned. And this guy is like, so we were on the road exploring with some ruins, and suddenly these weird snake people come out of nowhere, and they're like, we're like, hey, who are you guys? And they're like, don't bother us. And they just bugger off. And we're like, who the hell was 50 snake people? We don't know. So we're like, let's figure out where they came from. So we followed their trail, and it comes to this old ruin. And inside there were these other snake people, and they're really scary. And there's like thousands of them, and there's all these dead snake people. And what are these snake people fighting snake people? What's going on? So we just left because it was scary. I'm glad that they're way over here, and there's the province of Kalas between us and them, because these are guys in like veneer, And I was like, this is great. It's like this perspective of this like Venerian archaeologist, like, what the hell is this? Like, let's not mess with the snake people. So if you recall, when we talked about Calastia, I vaguely touched upon, and there's this creepy old ruin, that would be the Tower of Fang. So somewhere in Calastia, there's this ruin where Asaatthi used to live. It was conquered by the Yuan-Ti. I don't know if there's some still Yuan-Ti there or not, but it sounds like they pretty much abandoned it. And there's some great adventuring opportunity there. A whole Yuan-Ti fortress. So that happens. So they were down to 2 cities. Because so we've got 2 cities left. And they're like, no. And they're still doing their isolation thing. And then Mormo is like, the gods, they're a problem. By this point, the gods of Scarn have shown up. and they've been around for a while, but the Titans can smell rebellion in the air, and they're starting to prepare. And Mormo's like, I gotta prepare for this. I need to get my shit together. So her loyal folks are the Yuan-ti. She made them relatively recently, within the last 1,000 years or whatever. And she goes to them, and she goes to the one specifically, in the Tower of Fangs, and goes, "All right, I will give you even more power, but you must unify my children." And they're like, "All over that, Mom. What do you want?" Because they're like, enthusiastic, rabid Mormon followers. And she's like, "All right, I give you more power, but I need you to be able to walk among men and get so that you can, because there's these giant empires and stuff, and I need you to walk among them and be disguised and survive and do this stuff." She turns the Yuan-ti from, think D&D Yuan-ti, kind of weird snake people, to human looking, just flat out human looking. But they still have snake qualities inside. Basically, they can do this sort of alien-esque thing where their chest opens up and these snakes come out of their torso in kind of a woobly way.
Yeah.
So think like
Oogada boogada.
Medusa, but instead of the snake hair, it's sort of snake, I don't know, intestines or something. Not intestines, but snake thing comes out of their chest. It's kind of important. They can just go tuck it inside. So she makes, and they're called the High Gorgons. And there was also these weird wolf lion things. I was thinking like cougar cat things that the old Asaatthi in the Tower of Fangs used to use as their sleepy time guardians. So remember those guys who were guarding all the hibernating Asaatthi? I said that they had some forts, like I was saying, they have some stuff that helped them guard. Well, these guys, I made Fran laugh. These guys have these like wolf cat things, and Mormon goes, "Oh, and you'll need some help." So she takes them and she's like, "And I give them power too," and makes them the Low Gorgon, and they're basically like lions with snake hair and creepy and stuff. So she invents the High and Low Gorgon, who do all sorts of weird things like breed together and whatnot. And they're creepy and weird. But the high ones can pass for human pretty easily. And she sends them out and she says, "Gather my people, find all of my creations, find all of my children, gather them up into a massive army." And they're like, "Sure thing, Mom." And they just start wandering across Ghelspad. And they gather and they find the hags. So basically, she said, "There's a bunch of humans who worship me, go find them." So they find the hags and they're like, "You follow us." And they're like, "Okay." And she and all the other species is pre-Slytherins. There's none of that. But they basically start just gathering everybody up. And of course, they eventually end up in the city, the two remaining cities of the Asaatthi. Or at least they find the Jeweled City. They find the what was this one called? Ithis Ilnasith. And there was 1, 2, 3, 4 double letters in that one, guys. So many. That's the true name of the Jeweled City. They go there and they're like knocking on the door, going, "Hi, Mom wants us to make an army," and the Asaatthi are like, "Fuck off!" And they're like, "All right, we will just wait," and they just sort of sit there, super patient, like super patient. And the Asaatthi are like, they're super patient. They're like, "We will give you tea," and they're like, they're being really nice and patient. What's going on? And the Asaatthi were bickering among themselves and trying to decide what to do. And these Gorgons are just like, "We will wait. We will wait." Very, very chill and relaxed. And this happens for a while, like years, presumably. And then Mesos dies. Boom. War starts. Divine War triggers. Gods kill Mesos, and suddenly, boom, it's Divine War. So we're now well into OC. We've been well into the OC timeline at this point. So, so it's kind of interesting because there's this huge gap. It gets me. So the Yuan-Ti showing up, the war with the Yuan-Ti, just to give you kind of a time of that, was minus 550 OC. The Divine War, 3,529 OC. So minus OC 300 years plus OC 3,500 years. So that's 3,000 years that they're just hanging out in their cities, not going in? This is me just going, huh? Okay, sure, whatever. I don't know. It's a little off. Maybe I'm misreading the timeline? No, do you want to word? Elves run again, just blah blah blah. Rise of humans. Search Poker Plus. They're cataclysm. So they woke up 500 minus 500 OC. The Asaatthi show up. Empire of Lead shows up and it's like, no, you're gonna stay, because the Asaatthi are like, oh, we're gonna, and then the Empire leads, no, 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 no. So they basically, Empire Lead kept them down, and then the Charduni showed up and keep them down. So the Asaatthi really, for 3,000 years, cannot make a foothold. 3,500 years, 4,000 years, cannot make a foothold. So they're basically in their 2 little remaining cities, and something happens during that time to the other city. So in that intervening, and this is not clear what happened, but it was lost. That is the let me get the name right. These are my notes. The city of sages, Far Ithisi, is sometime during that intervening time, during the Lydian Empire and the barbarian days and the Charduni and all of that business. The city of sages is lost. So we don't really know what happened, and because I'm not even quite sure where it is, if it's in the Accruton or not. There's clearly one of them was in the Accruton. So there's basically just the Jeweled City left, and they do pretty much control all of the swamps of Chantet, but that's about it. And back here during the I will also say though that at this point during the Lydian Empire, the swamps of Chantet were bigger. The Accruton Desert hadn't exploded post-war explosion yet. And really what they're competing with at this point was the Elzen Empire. Now that we talked about when we did cover Chelzar. So to the south, the Empire of Elves has to deal with, and there's all these snake people in these swamps. But there's swamps, and who wants to go in there? That's gross. Nobody wants to go in the swamps. So so that pretty much cut off. Thanks for these mountains didn't even exist yet, so it was just swamps, and then plains, and the landscape was a little different because post-war and volcanoes and whatnot. So that's going on.
So out of curiosity, does it say? Does it clarify anywhere? Because so Mormo took the Yuan-Ti and turned them into Gorgons. Does it specify whether or not they still exist also? Were there Yuan-Ti that she left?
She took the Yuan-Ti that had been in that location. It was just the Yuan-Ti in the Tower of Fangs.
Yeah.
Oh, and I forgot to add that after she did that, so she went to the Tower of Fangs. So the Yuan-Ti had been holding that old Asaatthi city for presumably this whole time. These 4,000 intervening years between the Yuan-Ti Asaatthi War and the Divine War, or leading up to the Divine War, they'd been holding it, and she went there. So there's still Yuan-Ti living in Termana. It's not like they're the only Yuan-Ti thing.
But so they're going to be pretty rare to run into on Ghelspad.
Well, figure she probably made them a few hundred years before the Divine War.
Right.
And because it was clear that everybody was prepping for this beatdown for a while. I would say probably a good 500 years before the Divine War, because there was the Siluracian War happened, and all of that business happened. So you figure this was not, we're not talking, AV 3400. We're talking maybe 3000 probably. So she says these young, okay, I'm returning to Gorgon. And then I forgot to add, she takes that city, the Tower of Fangs, and goes woof, and just shoves it underground. It's like, you're not allowed to live here anymore, so you can't come back here. I need you to go out into the world, and I need you to gather my people. And they're like, oh, well, shit. So that's why that ruin is underground now. So if you're in Calastia and you're like, oh, let's go why you don't see this surface city of snake people. You know, it's underground. Mormons. So that's why, like, it's not an eyesore on the Calastian landscape. It's all underground. Now, presumably, like, I don't know, under Lake Repose or something. I don't know where it is, but it's like, is that the lake that's? Anyway, it's somewhere around there. I don't think it's under Lake Repose. I think it's under the Kildare Mountains somewhere. So rolling back, Gorgons show up. They sit on the doorstep. Mesos dies, and at that point, the Asaatthi are like, you know what, Gorgons? Yeah, I think we will join your army. I think we need to kick some butt. This is not good. We don't want. We kind of screwed it up with Mormo, but we would like her love back. So yes, we will help you fight this war. And the Asaatthi are like, okay, we'll help you with this army. So they start. They build this massive army of hags and Gorgons and Asaatthi and presumably maybe some Yuan-Ti and whoever's around in Ghelspad. And presumably there's some armies in other continents too, but this is pretty much what happens Mormon-wise in Ghelspad. And they start just tramping around the countryside. And there's one battle in particular, because remember that the Divine War kicked off when the Charduni, after the Charduni had conquered a bunch of Ghelspad to build the Charduni Empire, which was the last empire in Ghelspad before the Divine War occurred, which was like a shorter-lived empire, but they were basically in control of a huge chunk, not all of the continent like some of these other empires, but a huge chunk of the continent was controlled by the Charduni. So that was kind of the main powerhouse in terms of who they were fighting during the war in Ghelspad. Was the divine armies were the Charduni, the elves, some of the humans, blah, versus the orcs, obviously the Asaatthi, whoever else on the side of the giants, all that stuff. And independent of anything the gods were doing, the mortals were beating the shit out of each other this whole time in this massive global war. Talk about World War, like everybody except the Dragonlands and the North Pole were involved in this madness. Like
and the Dragonlands
continents of war.
I can't remember if it was through magic or whatever, but like the Emperor was like, I see this coming. Everyone come home. We don't want to be part of this.
Yeah, and there is a tip to like going all the way back in this early history there, and I didn't mention this because it was almost like a blip on the radar. There was one mention of the dragons in this giant Asath history, during which kind of gives a hint as to when. So the dragons were way more known in Termana. Like they kind of ruled Termana. They never ruled Ghelspad. There was never a dragon empire in Ghelspad. But there were certainly dragons in Ghelspad who kind of mucked about and did their thing. And there is a mention way back during the Asaatthi Empire and I'm going to find the exact book, but way back in the Asaatthi Empire, there's this moment where they talk about the humans and their draconic masters.
Yeah.
So, and who have left. So, or weren't around, or there weren't many of them, or something like that. So there's kind of a mention that there was some dragons here too, but not
and like
any kind of detail.
There. So like later, way later in the book, there's an appendix that talks about different classes that you can take, and the Asaatthi actually, at least for some time, revered the dragons and believed them, no matter what the dragons said or felt on their own, thought they were children in Mormo.
Which maps, kind of?
Yeah, I mean they look like they should be.
They look like they should be.
And so these dragon warriors, which is a class that they can take, embrace that and had this. Were able to tap into powers that were draconic in nature, which is interesting, and I would like to see them show up.
I put that finger on dragons being such a huge mythology in Ghelspad because they didn't have a lot of impact in Ghelspad. I mean, compared to Termana, which is like huge. Is they pretty much ruled Termana for a while. Well, someday we'll get to Termana. We don't have nearly as much information about Termana. but it sounds like to me at least there wasn't a lot of as much influence, and you got the rock dragons, but they were weird soldiers of the
Yeah,
Titans.
yeah, and those were made
Um,
in
yeah,
order to fight the Divine War, right?
but this book also came out roughly around when Oriental Adventures for 3.5 was getting super popular, and clearly they were doing some kind of tie-in, because you also see like a lot of that influence in this book, in those prestige classes and whatnot. They're
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, somebody wanted to play samurai. Okay, they made it a snake person.
Right, right.
Because it's like, oh yeah, yeah. And they make clear, explicit reference to the Oriental Adventures books that was coming out for core D&D at the same time. So that's kind of think where I think they went with that, was like, here's an easy way to kind of add that, but add kind of a draconic vibe, because snake people and everybody loves dragons, and Scarlands is sadly devoid of true dragon. But yeah, I think that's. But it is cool. But it's very. There's certainly some Asian culture vibe, when we get to the actual what's happening now in what's left of the Asaatthi Empire. Okay, so the war. So, the main force the Asaatthi are fighting in the region that they're fighting in is the Charduni, and coordination was kind of neat, because there was this big battle between the Mormo forces and the Charduni, and in Termana, the Yuan-Ti and Termana were simultaneously attacking the Charduni homeland, which caused the Charduni and Ghelspad to give pause and be like, do we have to send reinforcements? What do we have to do? Blah, blah, blah. And as they're sitting down debating this and trying to figure out, the Mormon forces in Ghelspad attack them. And they're like, nope, smack. and kick their asses because they're so distracted and stuff. So that was one of the bigger battles, the bigger successful battles of the Asaatthi during the Divine War. But then the other big battle is at the end of the war, or toward the end, actually not at the end, but toward the end of the war, when the massive army starts pushing back on the forces of the Divine, and they're basically moving further and further east, and they've reached the Broadreach Forest, and they're pushing through the Broadreach, and they're almost past the Broadreach to reach the Haggard Hills with the intention of taking out Veritray. And don't tell me the Asaatthi aren't like, we want our city back, because they totally do. So they've pushed through the Broadreach, and they're kicking ass, and they're just totally kicking ass, and like the divine forces keep falling back and falling back and falling back, and then Mormo is like, I want to see this, and she shows up on the battlefield to basically gloat over her forces winning. And little did any of them know it was a trap. So the reason the divine forces were retreating was because they were trying to draw Mormo out to make an appearance. So they were making it look like they were losing. And as soon as Mormo shows up, gods show up. And this is basically Mormo's fall. And let me get it right. Chardun basically shows up, bounds Mormo into her physical form, so she can't, snake out and disappear. And Madriel casts this whole like massive blessing over the entire army, so all the venom and stuff can't affect them, and they can't all just die of toxic poison. And then Belsmith and Vangal and Denev beat the shit out of Mormo and rip her to tiny pieces.
Yeah.
And Mormo falls, and the horn saw happens.
Right.
And this is
one of the top vacation spots on Ghelspad.
and amazingly, is a lot of those armies are just sort of stayed there. Why are there so many hags in the Hornsaw? Not just because this is where Mormo fell, which is probably the main reason, but this is kind of where they were. But when Mormo fell, it was like, well, we lost. no, we lost. There's like, what do
Right.
we do? But they basically regrouped, maintained control of that region, but really didn't have the anything to go any further, and thus the majority of the Hornsaw is in the hands of the Mormites, despite the fact that their Titan is gone. So and we'll talk about the Hornsaw in detail in a later episode.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like we allude
So-
to a lot of things that we haven't talked about yet.
We
The
haven't talked about
Hornsaw
it
is not a pleasant place to visit.
No, the Hornsaw is truly horrible. So meanwhile, the Asaatthi are like, we have a home. You hags and Gorgons can stay. We're going back to our swamp, and they sort of limp back to the swamps of Kentet, and that is where they are today, 150 years later, or 160, 70 years later. And yeah, and that's pretty much the majority of their population is in the swamps of Kentet. They still have that original city, the Jeweled City. It's also called the Lost City of the Asath, which I think is funny, because while it was lost for a while, it hasn't been lost for a couple thousand years.
Yeah, everyone knows where it is. It's on the map, right?
It's on the map, but
see.
there are legitimately 5 other lost cities of the Asath out there. So this isn't the lost one. This is the one we know where it is. Well, presumably we know where Veritrea is too, because the elves are sitting on it. But there's several other ones that are truly lost. And the majority of these Asath are here. Although there is also a branch of the mountain Yakrudin looking for one of the really lost cities, because there is some city in the Yakrudin, and again, I'm not sure which one it is. But let me read further in the book. Maybe the book reveals which one it is. It might be. I've got it narrowed down to 2. So I think it's either the first city, which is a possibility, or the City of Sages. I'm not sure. It's one of those 2. I'm certain it's one of those 2 because they're the only 2 that fit the description.
Yeah.
But ask me in a week, and I'll know, and I'll either know or I'll have confirmed that it is not information that is apparent. It certainly wasn't a chapter 1. Which one? But that's kind of where they're at. Is those 2 locations.
So in the update from 3rd edition to 5th edition, they introduced the concept of the redeemed. What is it that the Asaatthi specifically chose to become redeemed? And not all of them have. But what would you say?
I mean, so in the descriptions of the remaining society in Kentet, it's complicated stuff, and we'll go into that in the next episode. There's this huge major, like, we follow Mormont. This is our bag.
Right.
This is what we are. And I would say I think that's the difference, is those who still maintain that loyalty to their fallen Titan and to follow that culture around that subjugation and conquer and attitude of, like, we're better than everybody else because we're the first and we're the chosen ones and blah blah blah, is what makes the Asaatthi Titans.
Yeah.
In that regard.
So those who are redeemed, would you say they've essentially just kind of?
It's the very end of chapter 1.
Yeah.
This history chapter that made me go, this is what a redeemed looks like.
Yeah.
In my mind. Because there's this guy who's basically telling the story in chapter 1. He's this old Asaatthi historian who's gathered some of these memory globes, and he's sharing them with a vigilant in the freaking perforated plains. So with the implication there was Asaatthi stronghold. So that makes me think maybe that is where the first city is, or either the first city or the City of Sages. Again, I don't know which. And he says at the end of his little tale, this is 15 pages of history. Thus I wander and relate the tale of Scarn's greatest race. In ages past, I would have maimed or killed for revealing the secrets I have, but no one exists now to whom I owe my allegiance. None save for myself. So with this luxury, my tale is done. Do with it what you will, humans of this new age. And it's that line, none save for myself, to me, that's what a redeemed Asaatthi is somebody who's just basically, it doesn't mean they're God follower.
Right.
It doesn't mean like they're gone, oh, Tennel's awesome. It means I no longer live for Momo. I no longer live for my queen. I no longer live for the way of my people.
Yeah.
I am doing my own thing. And maybe my own thing is Madriel's the best or whatever, but it's probably not.
Yeah.
It's probably I'm out there just finding my own way.
Right. Right.
And I think that's the redeemed Asaatthi.
Yeah.
Is that. And it's funny because in our game that we played with Travis, one of the players played in Asaatthi, and I hadn't done this reading yet. I don't know if I doubt he read this book, but I know he read the stuff in the SLPG, and I think he nailed that concept of both. I don't give a shit about this other stuff,
right?
And that seek of immortality, and that concept around gathering memories and sharing memories, that all really maps well to this background.
Yeah, absolutely.
That so many of those powerful Asaatthi were all about immortality, and they really delved into necromancy in that way. And also, so it was like, oh my god, that character was like, he did actually kind of nail it of that certain specific type of Asaatthi. But so yeah, I think that to me is that's what it redeemed is.
Yeah, absolutely.
But super stoic, very stoic. So that's it for chapter 1.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've got a bunch of stuff about the culture, Swamps of Cantet, as well as that like group that's off in the Accrudan doing their thing in the Accrudan. We can talk about next time.
Yeah.
Because I haven't read chapter 2 in detail yet. But there's some cool stuff there.
Yeah.
What else is there anything else we want to cover?
I think that's it for today. So catch us next week, same time. That is 1 p.m. No, 2 p.m. Eastern.
2 p.m. 11 a.m. Pacific.
Right. To continue our talk about the Asaatthi, more about what they're doing now as opposed to what today's episode was about.
Sarah, what they're doing now.
What's that?
What you just said.
Sarah,
Hi,
tell us
I'm
all
Sarah
about
Stewart, and I
yourself.
pretend to know a bunch of shit about Scarred Lands. I wrote a book about it. I know so much shit about Scarred Lands. I wrote a novel. Running D&D in the Scarred Lands since the first book came out in 2000. I've got a bunch of titles on Drive-Thru-RPG, all Scarred Lands related, and we'll be coming out with some more in the next month or so.
Huzzah.
And you can find me on Discord because I suck everywhere else. KETINA pound or
hashtag, yeah.
Hashtag 6065 6065. Ketina 6065. Normally the email would be the @ so I'm like Ketina.
Right.
I'm also on morelikeThisIndustries.com is our website.
Yay.
You can find me doing other things too. Kind of. I'm tired.
Huzzah.
Who are you?
I am Jeremy Hochhalter. I host this here Twitch channel. Please follow along. I am currently, I think, three followers away from being available to be an affiliate, which rocks. That last 10 has just taken so long. So please follow along if you haven't already. You can find me on Twitter at WHPubs or over on Facebook at WH Publications. You can go to WHPublications.com. I also publish on Drive-Thru RPG, Slurration Vault, and DM's Guild. I think that's it for me for today. Everyone join us next week, and we will see you then. Bye.